So it's no secret that a topwater catches giant fish, and it is a phenomenal way to catch fish, and it's one of the most exciting ways out there on the planet to catch fish. Watching those fish go airborne over those baits is one of the most thrilling things you can have as a bass fisherman. But there's things that I wish somebody would have kick-started me to the end of the finish line when I first picked one of these up, because if you don't know the gear to throw this on, if you've never personally experimented with throwing a topwater, you lose a lot of fish. It is a very make it or break it technique. And so what I'm gonna do today is I'm gonna tell you all the things that I wish somebody would have told me before I before I went out there and lost dozens and dozens and dozens of giant fish on just using things that make absolutely no sense. So I'm gonna break down a few different baits, the gear that I throw on. I'm gonna talk about all the things that I wish somebody would have told me about throwing topwaters. Real quick, guys, if you haven't hit that subscribe button, be sure to hit that so you guys can follow along with the regular content coming out every single week. But let's get back to what we were talking about. So the first thing I want to talk about is the gear that you throw a topwater on. That is probably the most critical part of throwing a topwater. And there's two setups that I'm going to use. If you guys are straight largemouth fishing, don't use a stiff rod. I wouldn't even use a jerkbait rod. Most guys like to throw like a 6'10" medium fast. What I like to do, because when bass come up, specifically largemouth use the suction when they open their mouth to pull that bait under. Most often they do not come out of the water and get it, and if they do, they just come up nice and slow and eat it. So what I do is I use a specific crankbait rod. It's a 6'10" medium moderate action rod, because what you have is those fish will come up to eat it, and if you're like me, you get jumpy on the trigger. You want to jack them as soon as it happens, because as soon as they break the surface, you want to yank on it. Well, a lot of times what happens is they're tracking it and they're following behind it, and they come out of the water, and before they can come down on it, you're already setting the hook out of their mouth. So by using that crankbait style rod, what happens is you kind of bulletproof yourself in the fact that by the time you set the hook, that rod's still loading up and they come down on it, and you can actually catch those fish, and they'll have it like all through their mouth. So that is a big, big key that I can tell you if you're fishing for a largemouth. So if you guys are smallmouth fishing, you don't want to use that parabolic rod for the most part, because what happens with smallmouth is they have that smaller mouth, so they rely on just straight blunt force and velocity to come up and get that bait. So if you're using that slower action bait, a lot of times what can happen is they can come down on it just having it by the side and spit it out before you really get the hook set. So I like to use a jerkbait style rod for those. I really do. A 6'10" medium fast, and that way when they come up and snap at it, a lot of times you can just keep working that bait. You really have to train yourself, but you can keep working that bait because they come up and go down before you really have a chance to react. So you're really relying on those treble hooks that you have to stick them, and then just fighting them like you normally would after they get it, because most oftentimes they get that back treble or the back two trebles, and that's going to be your biggest key, is just trying to remain patient as they're coming up, because they'll come up on it 4 or 5 times in a row. Like largemouth, a lot of times they'll come up on it once or twice and they're done, but those smallmouth, they'll be going off and on it, just following it in the whole way. So you just got to keep working it and letting that rod load up whenever they get it, because as soon as they get it, they'll go down and you can stick them right away with it. And that's why I like that faster action rod specifically for smallmouth. Spotted bass are kind of just do whatever you want, whatever works for you, because they're kind of in between. So whatever comfort level you're at, that's the rod that I would go with if you're fishing for spotted bass. So the next thing that I wish somebody would have told me about is the hooks that these baits come with. Most oftentimes the hooks are trash when they come with them. So what I like to do is you have to upgrade the hooks just to the point where they won't catch on themselves. So what I like to do is if you take both of your trebles, or 2 of your trebles, and try to get them to hook together, if you can't physically get them to hook together, that's how you know you're doing it right. But I want to get it to the point where it is like really, really close to being at that point. Like this one, if I put them together, I can almost get them to clinch, and that's what you want to have, because that way you get the biggest surface area below this bait, especially for smallmouth. Because like I said, they go nuts on that bait, and if you're using smaller treble hooks, a lot of times they'll just get the side of the bait and they won't actually engulf the bait. Largemouth, that's not as big of an issue, because like I said, they come up and just eat the whole bait, whereas smallmouth kind of nip at the side of the bait and they'll kind of grab at it. But you want the biggest surface area possible for those hooks to get a hold of. And the hook size also has to do with how you fight these fish. So a lot of times, like I said, they will get one hook. And what I do when those fish get back toward the boat is if I can see that the bait is like this out of their mouth, I try to maneuver that bait to where it'll hook them again. So if that fish is coming alongside the boat, I can see that I'm pulling it like this. I will turn my rod and try specifically to get those hooks to grab again. Because you have 3 treble hooks on there, you should be able to get another hook point to get a hold of them. And if you get them underneath here, where like underneath their jaw, where that gill plate is real soft, or if you get them across the nose where you can get it under that plate, you got them at that point. But that is the biggest thing, is just trying to upgrade those hooks to the level where you have the most grabbing power possible, because that's going to allow you to lose less fish and get more hookups on it, because you're going to miss fish no matter what. But if you can reduce the amount of fish you lose, that is going to be absolutely critical when it comes to throwing a topwater bait. So the line that I like to throw with this is I like to go with 30-pound braid, because braid floats and it has zero stretch. And then I either pair that with a fluorocarbon or monofilament leader. If I'm throwing spook style baits, I typically go with a fluorocarbon, because what the fluorocarbon does, I know it's against what everybody thinks, you should throw monofilament, right? The fluorocarbon holds the nose of my bait down, and it'll still walk really nice like this. But what I mean by hold the nose down, what that does is when fish blow up on it, instead of that bait floating on top, that line up here, allowing that bait to pop whenever those fish bust it, because a lot of times they'll pop it away from them. If they come up really, really hard on it, sometimes they'll just throw the bait. What that fluorocarbon does is that'll go under the water, so when they do that, the bait will just flop over. It won't actually go launching like 10 feet, where then you almost don't have a shot at them anymore. Instead of that, it'll just go a couple inches, and that way those fish are still in the game. If you keep working that bait, they'll hit the water, turn around, and hear that bait still working, and they'll come back for second, third, fourth, fifth attempt at that bait, and that'll just give you more chances to catch that fish. But that fluorocarbon, using 15 to 20 pound, will help you so much as far as holding the nose of that bait down. The 30-pound braid specifically floats and has castability. What I can do with that 30-pound braid is I can absolutely bomb that bait, because a lot of times if you're throwing a spook, or if you're throwing a topwater bait, sometimes you're targeting schooling fish, and a lot of times you don't know where they're going to come up. Sometimes they come up 100 yards away, and you have to be able to get that cast there right now. So if you can get your trolling motor on high and launch that bait, you know, that 30-pound braid will do the rest as far as allowing you to have the best castability possible. And that is a huge tip for you guys that fish, you know, alewife lakes, or those southern lakes that have those, I can't even, thread fins, or not thread fins, but whatever those shad are that are always like going absolutely nuts. But that is absolutely key for castability. So one really sneaky thing that I wish somebody would have told me is that all spooks aren't made the same. So this is the 6th Sense Catwalk, and if you look at the style of that, looks just like a pencil. It has a pointed nose, and that bait is the same thickness basically all the way across. And then you have the 6th Sense Dogma, and if you look at that, you can see it has a cupped nose on it, and that topwater bait goes up a little bit. And I knew, you know, there's specific spooks like the shower blow that has that cup nose that throws water like crazy. But I thought if it's a spook, right? Wrong. So with this Dogma, it sits a lot lower in the water and works better when it's calmer out, versus this Dogma, or this Catwalk. This Dogma sits higher in the water, and it works a lot better when there's a little bit of chop on the water. It sits higher up, and those fish just get a better read on it when there's a little bit of chop, a little bit of wind, a little bit of rain, versus when it's calm, when I'm fishing in the morning. This just allows those fish to get it so much better than this bait, because this bait, a lot of times with how high it rides, they miss it. Versus this lower sitting bait, they get it a lot better, especially if you guys are fishing for smallmouth and spotted bass. That is absolutely critical if that bait sits a little bit lower in the water, because those fish rely on blunt force to come up and get it, and if it's riding high, they pop it a lot more, versus if it's sitting lower, they tend to get the hooks a lot more often. So look at the spooks before you throw them, and try to understand what conditions you're going to want to throw those specific spooks in. You know, put them on a pond, test them out, so that way you can get the action down and see which way you want to use it. Now, what I really wish somebody would have told me about topwater baits is they just get absolutely bigger bites. If you're throwing a topwater bait, the chances of catching smaller fish go down, especially if you're fishing for schooling fish specifically. If you're on a body of water like Champlain where you have big groups of fish, some of the best ways to catch the biggest fish in the school is by throwing a topwater bait, because only the biggest, most aggressive fish are going to come up to get that bait, because they are their most vulnerable at the surface. That is when they are most vulnerable from below and from above. You know, eagles, ospreys, etc., herons, that's when they're going to be at their most vulnerable. So using a big topwater is a great way to just go catch absolute giants. So if you're fishing grouped fish, you know, and you're worried about getting the biggest fish out of there, because sometimes if you catch a couple, they shut off. you can go throw these big topwater baits, and you won't catch as many, but you'll catch the biggest fish in the school. So if you guys are tournament fishing, topwaters are absolutely key. And you see it when those guys are Elite Series or MLF, they do that, but it never really clicked for me until I started throwing it and seeing the quality that I was getting over the quantity. So putting a topwater bait in your hand can be a great way to catch absolute giants. So the last thing that I'm going to talk about is the reel. If you're throwing a topwater bait, specifically spooks, that's what this has kind of all been oriented around, I would be throwing an 8:2-to-1 gear ratio for the fact that I can bomb that bait, and if I miss my target, or if they decide to blow up somewhere else, or if my bait gets fouled up, I can get that bait back to the boat as quickly as physically possible. So keeping that in mind when you're getting your cast distance down and you're wanting to get that bait out there and work it back as fast as possible, there's no faster way to do that with an 8.2 than with an 8.2-to-1. So keeping that fast gear ratio reel, unless you're throwing like a Revo rocket, which is a 9.2-to-1, but I only go 8.2-to-1. Keeping that high gear ratio reel in your hand is critical for covering a ton of water and being able to make those casts to specifically catch those schooling fish when they blow up and where they blow up. So for more information on what topwater baits you should be throwing, I have a video linked right up here where I go through all the different topwater baits so you can see exactly what topwaters you should be throwing during what conditions you have on hand. I go through and I break down whopper ploppers, buzz baits, poppers, you name it. I go through in specific detail on the gear that I throw them on and the conditions that I throw them in to help you guys know what topwaters to throw in specific conditions. So thank you guys so much for watching. Y'all take care and stay safe out there on the water.